The next statement in Genesis gives the boundaries of this title deed. In Genesis chapter 15, verses 18 through 21, God says, "On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, 'To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Raphites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites.'" Note especially here the Jebusites. They were a race of giants that were the first known owners of Jerusalem. Now, the exact dimensions of this land grant were literally spelled out. They've never come to possess all of it yet, but God said they will ultimately inherit it forever. As I've said before, one of the groups that I'm really coming against is today called the preterists. They're the ones who most push replacement theology. The preterists claim that a prophecy I'm about to show you predicts the end of Israel as a nation and a distinct people. They say it means that Israel's covenants were permanently taken away and given to the church in AD 70. But they ignore two vital points that are in this key prophecy made by the Lord Jesus himself: the word "until" and the phrase, "the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." Let's read the passage in Luke chapter 21, verses 22 through 24. Jesus made this prophecy shortly before his death. He said, "Because these are the days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. For there will be great distress upon this nation, and wrath to this people. And they, the Israelites, will fall by the edge of the sword, and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, until," now there's that key word, until, akris in Greek, "the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." This is the key word they overlook. Until, a conjunction. You see, this prophecy is talking about the destruction of Israel in AD 70 and their scattering throughout the world. And Jerusalem would continue to be trampled down by the Gentiles, but there's a time limit given here. Consider the fact that the word "until" is crucial. Let's make it as simple as possible. The conjunction "until" means certain things that were going on in the past stop. And then later, a new phase of what stopped will start again. Now, what has been going on in this prophecy? The people of Israel were going to be scattered throughout every nation. They were going to fall by the edge of the sword, and Jerusalem would continually be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles. But then comes the conjunction "until." It means there's something different going to happen after this. You see, Jesus shows there's still a plan for the Jewish people. It's brought out in Matthew chapter 25, beginning with verse 31. Jesus clearly shows that there's going to be a segregation of Gentiles from the Israelites when he comes back at the second advent, and immediately judges the survivors. When he comes to the earth, the first thing he's going to do is gather all the surviving Gentiles apart from Israel. Jesus will separate all the surviving Gentile believers as sheep from the goats. The believers go on his right hand and will go into the kingdom that he will set up. The goats are the unbelievers. They go on his left hand, and they will be cast directly into judgment. This passage shows that the Gentiles are no longer his representatives in the world as they had been in the church age. During the church age, there's no distinction between Jew and Gentile. This is especially prominent in the book of Ephesians. But from the tribulation onward, there's a segregation of Jews from Gentiles. By the way, this shows that the church would have to have been taken out of the world before the tribulation. Because if the church were still on earth, there could be no segregation of a believing Gentile and a believing Jew. Now look at Ezekiel chapter 20. This passage shows that the Israelites are going to be judged in an entirely different place at the second advent of Christ, out by Mount Sinai. There, the believing Jewish remnant will be separated from the unbelieving Jews. The Lord reveals here that there's a future for the believing Israelites, and his covenants are still binding to them. Let's look at another very important prophecy that I call hope in the olive tree. It fits right in with this other prophecy. There are some tremendous lessons we can learn from Romans chapter 9, 10, and 11. The Apostle Paul wrote those chapters to silence the people within the church who, even at that time, were tending toward anti-Semitism. In chapter 9, he shows that Israel in the past was elected. Chapter 10, Paul shows that Israel in the present is rejected. But chapter 11 shows clearly that the people of Israel in the future will be accepted. Just look at Romans chapter 11, verse 22. Consider, therefore, the kindness and the sternness of God, sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you, provided that you continue in his kindness. Otherwise you must realize, this is speaking of the Gentiles as a group, contrasted with the Israelites as a group, not about believers and unbelievers. You also will be cut off. And if they, the Israelites, do not persist in unbelief, they will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. After all, if you Gentiles were cut out of an olive tree that is wild by nature, and contrary to nature were grafted into a cultivated olive tree, how much more readily would these, the Israelites, the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? Now let's stop for a moment and think about this. What does the olive tree symbolize? This passage is obviously an allegory, but even allegories have a literal basis of what it's illustrating. The olive tree symbolizes the promises and covenants of the eternal relationship with God that is first vouchsafed and given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and passed on to their descendants. So they are the cultivated olive tree that possesses these things. However, as discipline, some of the branches were cut out, and Israel is under a partial judicial blinding in this age. But the point is, there's still this unconditional covenant to Israel. Now let's go on to the rest of the quote from Romans 11. Paul says, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until, now there's that word again, the conjunction until. In other words, they're in a partial hardening until what? The rest of the verse answers, until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. You see, this is referring back to the exact same thing that Jesus referred to in Luke chapter 21, verse 24. The times of the Gentiles are completed when the full number of Gentiles that are to be saved and brought into God's eternal family have come in. And then it says, and so all Israel will be saved. That is, after the times of the Gentiles is completed. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. As far as the gospel is concerned, they're today enemies on your account. But as far as election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. Okay, let's summarize. The main issue of this context is that Israel is under partial judicial blindness and removed from its place of calling as God's representatives on earth.